Of the Architectural Review Committee to order. Let's go ahead and do roll call. This is my first meeting as chair. So do I read off the names or does staff do that?
I can do roll call.
Okay, great.
Committee member Hunter.
Present.
Vice Chair Ostavar.
Here.
Committee member Palmer.
Here.
And Chair Pauly.
Here.
Committee member Sanders. And committee member Turgan.
Here.
With committee member Turgenza absent. Staff present today is Principal Planner Fernanda Roveri, Associate Planner Matthew Buggart, and Recording Secretary Spencer Argenbright. Information on participating in this meeting and providing public comment, including remotely via Zoom or telephone, is on this meeting's agenda, which is online at isearchmonterey.org. Remote commenters will be muted until it is their turn to speak, and a timer will be shown on the screen. If you are connected on Zoom, the timer is accurate with no delay. In the chamber, we recommend keeping phones and devices muted to prevent audio interference with the meeting. Thank you for participating in your city government.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and open up the consent agenda. Is there any member of the public or commission committee that would like to discuss a consent item? That wasn't a yes. No, okay. Just a tip of the cap, okay? Yeah. All right. So if members of the public would like to participate via, members of the public can participate via Zoom.
There are no attendees with their hands raised.
Okay. Since we do not have any motions, we will go ahead and open up public comments.
Okay, on the consent agenda, I move that we approve the meeting, minutes from the meeting of August 7th, 2024.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you, Ed. So are there any items not on the agenda that the public would like to comment on? Seeing no hands, we will move on to our first public appearance.
And there are no attendees online with their hands raised.
Gotcha. Okay. We'll go ahead to our first public appearance.
Sounds good. I will share my screen.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Matthew Buggart, and I'm an associate planner with the City of Monterey's Planning Division. Today, we're here to talk about 739 Archer Street for an architectural review permit for a two-story addition at today's ARC meeting. The recommendation from city staff is that the ARC adopt the resolution to approve the architectural review permit with associated conditions of approval. This is the subject property from a Google Street View. I did not have time to pull from my phone. There's a porch. It's a two-story structure on the front and then a one-story structure on the back. This is in the new Monterey neighborhood in the northwestern side of the city. It is a R1 property, single-family residential. And this aerial view here shows the street on the downslope side, and there are homes to the rear. The site plan for the house, the proposal is to put an ADU as part of the lower floor, and the ADU portion is not subject to architectural review, but there are other additions and things that they're planning to do outside of that, which is why they're before you today. The side view of the property has a porch up here, and the JAD would go on the ground floor down here, and the primary residence is this whole top floor. The project includes closing the balcony that's up here and adding a deck. And then a portion of the downstairs would be bumped out a little bit to accommodate the ADU. The next slides will show a couple different more angles. Here is the existing shop area. There are 3 support beams here, and then the garage portion over here. And this portion is going to be enlarged to have this ADU on the lower floor, including the lower bump out. And the garage would become tightened to a point that is no longer legally a garage due to the width, but becomes a storage area. This is allowed with development of an ADU. For the top floor, there is a covered deck in the front. And like I mentioned, this would be enclosed. And the living area up top would be enlarged, and the new deck would wrap around to the side, to the front. The various elevations of the proposed structure, there would be alterations to windows and doors on the upper floor and to the lower floor to accommodate both of these changes, but the actual roof line would not be changing of the residence at all. It would all be enclosed in pretty much the boundary of what the home currently is. Here's the side-by-side. It would just be bumped out a little bit with the balcony coming out from under the eave. This is the rear elevation. No proposed changes back here, actually. And again, the changes are only for the front of the structure and no real alterations to views or privacy with the neighbors. Required findings for approval is that the proposed siding form, mass, and architectural style must be found appropriate. It meets the development standards, floor area ratios, the same roof shape, and found compatible with the single-family neighborhood. Views, privacy, and living environment were not found to be impaired. Very little was changing on that second store upper balcony area. The project must be found consistent with city plans and design guidelines. There were no significant deviations to the existing structure, and the exterior finish, colors, materials, and all other exterior features must be found to be appropriate. And they are currently proposing matching board widths, matching color to the existing residence, and no significant changes on that either. The city staff is recommending the standard conditions of approval, and the project would be required to comply with those. And with that, staff's recommendation is that the ARC adopt a resolution approving the architectural review permit with conditions of approval. That concludes staff's presentation. I am pretty sure that the applicant would be online, but they may not be. This is their first time interacting with the city, and it's okay. That's staff's presentation.
Thank you, Matthew. Does anybody have questions of staff?
I have one question. It's about the water for the ADU. So we should assume that if it's come here, it's already been approved for the water addition for the ADU.
That is included as part of the conditions. The actual intake process for the paperwork goes through the building department,
So I thought, okay, just making sure.
but
Thank
they are aware it is required.
Speaking of conditions, I was going to ask, maybe I just missed it. What are the conditions?
So the conditions of approval are those that apply to just about any construction project, including the
So standard conditions, not
standard
additional
conditions of
conditions.
approval.
Okay.
There's no special.
Yeah, often you
There is one, the one that requires that on the plans, the wording be changed to ADU from JADU. Yeah.
My bad. There is one special condition of approval. Technically, this is an ADU and it was marked on the plans as a JADU. A JADU is only constructed within an existing residence, and since there's a little bump out, it's technically by definition becomes an ADU. So, but it didn't functionally change anything about the project.
Thank you.
Is that the only qualifier for a JADU, that it is entirely within the footprint of an existing?
There are a couple differences between a JADU and an ADU. A JADU can share sanitation facilities with the primary residence and can be interconnected between the two habitable areas. In this case, they are proposing sanitation, kitchen. It's a full ADU essentially down there.
Separate meters. Is that what that means? Basically,
ADUs
that kind
can
of
share a
thing.
meter?
Yeah. Or they can put it in
They,
your- yeah.
yeah, the utilities usually also get worked out with the building department.
No problem.
Is there any commitment to a deed restriction for that ADU?
There is a deed restriction for a JADU in which the property owner is required to live on site as their primary residence.
Which, were you asking about a specific deed
What,
restriction?
are there any deed restrictions around the cost of renting the JDU? or
No.
ADU?
No.
No, there's not.
All right, would the applicant like to make a presentation?
There are no attendees online.
All right, so would any member of the public like to comment? All right, seeing no member of the public, we'll go ahead and open it up for discussion.
Well, I'd just like to continue in that line. You asked about water, and it's not clear yet, I suppose, whether this will involve any additional water credits. Do you know if it will involve any additional water credits?
Due to the current moratorium, there are no additional water credits that get allocated to properties. So they are stuck with whatever the existing water features are on their property. It is my understanding that they have already talked with the water district about the fact that they have enough water on site. As for the balance as to whether they're making low efficient toilets into higher efficient toilets or some other math involved there, planning really removes ourselves from that portion.
I think maybe does the board, would it be good to explain to them how the water credit, I mean, I know because I'm an architect, so I have to get these permits a lot. Would it be good to, because you can't pull a building permit without getting the stamp of approval from the water district. So if they don't have, it's basically like the final step in your building permit review. And the planning department usually asks for the permit application, but that application is not processed at the time of the planning review, but you cannot pull a building permit without. So technically you could get planning approval without having your water credits in order.
Right.
Mhm.
So with that in mind, it occurs to me that if this were to run into a water credit issue, what would happen to any approval here at the ARC
So-
for the ADU?
Yeah, so the ADU portion, like I mentioned, isn't actually subject to AR review. The portion that you guys are really reviewing is that second story and the deck portion. However, since it's all tied into this architectural review application, if it is approved today, the length of the approval is 2 years out from the date of approval. And as long as they apply for an extension, essentially, it can go out from there. As long as they've applied for the extension within that 2-year period.
Is it safe to say our jurisdiction ends before any discussions of water credits begin? I mean, in terms of whether they are granted approval for the plans, would they have to come back to us with fewer fixtures or something?
It just basically says that they run the risk of,
Yeah.
We're just approving the architecture and, they run the risk of not receiving water.
Yeah, we have a condition that's included here. The project is subject to the rules and regulations as adopted by the Water Management District. The applicant proceeds at their own risk. No building permits will be issued if water is not available.
And the water
It's-
district will also deed restrict the unit for low flow fixtures.
And as a note, when it comes to accessory dwelling unit questions, we receive a lot of them at the planning office. And the very first thing that at least I bring up with people is, have you talked to the water district yet?
But just remember that the project before you is the second story bump out and deck. And so you don't have any discretion regarding the ADU part of the project. So it shouldn't, it's not even part of the project you're reviewing today.
I guess just to be clear, if the structural changes that we are approving were not made, they would not be able to create a JDU for, I guess, the definitions of what a JDU involves, like the windows rather than the door or something like that. There is some contingency, it seems like. Would they be able to have an ADU without approval of the second story changes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and they could also propose an ADU on the second story and still not go through architectural review. ADUs are completely exempt from the architectural review component.
Right, that's far enough down the rabbit hole for me. Thank you.
Just to keep going down that rabbit hole, they can't, you said an ADU, that would be an ADU in lieu of the lower level. They can't propose two ADUs without planning approval.
I suppose this is a little bit of a rabbit hole.
Yeah,
It is, it's a single family residence, so they can have one ADU.
Right.
If it was a multifamily residence, they could have multiple ADUs. They could have two ADUs. In the case that an ADU was attached to the primary residence, it could go up to 25 feet and still not go through architectural review.
So if this were
ADUs
a
are-
duplex, if this were a duplex, it could have two ADUs.
It could have
But it's
more.
a single family residence, so it can only have one ADU.
Correct.
Any other thoughts, comments? Does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve 739 Archer Street architectural review permit.
Well, second.
We have a motion and we have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those, aye. All those opposed? And the motion carries.
And that is appealable to the planning commission within the next 10 days with forms available online and in the planning office.
Okay, so we'll move on to our second public appearance from which I will have to recuse myself because I live within the applicable distance of the project. Now, does someone else need to become chair in my absence?
Leave that as me.
That's you. All right, good luck.
Where's the cheat sheet? We've already started. I'm good. Still you, I think.
Still me.
We'll wait till. Parts.
I will share my screen. Good afternoon. Today we are also here to talk about 1300 Monterey Avenue, which is a sign permit application SI 24-140 for a vehicle-oriented sign with internal illumination. The recommendation from city staff is that the ARC adopt the resolution to approve the sign permit application with a special condition and a standard condition of approval. The site is located in the southwestern portion of the city. The general plan land use designation is commercial and its zoning is visitor accommodation facility, or VAF. Any sign that goes to be installed at a VAF property needs to be approved through ARC. And in addition to that, any internally illuminated proposed signage also needs to go through ARC. So there are two reasons that it's before you today. The proposal is for a monument sign that is replacing an existing monument sign along Monterey Avenue. The sign is for the Aura Inn, located roughly in the same location as where there was a previous sign, which was the Super 8. And this is by the check-in area. The height of the sign would be 68, 69 inches, and it would be full width mounted on a cement footing. And each of these letters would be able to be internally illuminated as well. And here's a nighttime rendering that's been provided of what the lettering would look like. We'd have push-through acrylic, push-through lettering. Similar signs have been approved through ARC as well, of which there are some examples here with the push-through lettering look. Both of these signs were approved last year through the Architectural Review Committee. This one for Ohana, and then this one for a nearby property with some halo lit lettering and a internally illuminated logo. Findings required for approval is that the proposal achieves the purposes and objectives of the sign ordinance. The proposal must be consistent with the guidelines, or ARC determines that the proposal better achieves the purpose of the guidelines. And there's an asterisk next to that because I'm going to talk to that a little bit on the next slide. And also that the proposal must be found consistent with the general plan. This is a singular sign identifying a existing business, and so it was found to achieve the purpose. One of the items of the sign guidelines is that a vehicle-oriented sign should only be installed on properties with a minimum front building setback of 20 feet. And in this case, the building is closer than 20 feet to the front property line. However, since this is effectively replacing an existing sign and there didn't seem to be any easy different locations for the sign to be put, it seemed appropriate to put on this site. Additionally, the whole rest of the building is well beyond the 20-foot setback for the property. A recommended special condition, one of the comments that the planning department received from the city's public works division is to ensure that the sign is placed outside of the city right-of-way, that it would not be going for a encroachment permit, and staff recommends a special condition to require a survey and ensure the sign is placed outside the city's right-of-way. This requirement would be a part of the building permit application to install the sign. With that, staff's recommendation is to adopt the resolution to approve the sign permit application with the special and standard conditions of approval. That concludes staff's presentation. I believe the applicant is also here.
Thank you. I think we'll start with committee questions.
Matthew, for when we have internally illuminated signs, is there a standard by which lumens, maximum lumens are for those signs? And what are the standards and what are the lumen or intensity of this sign?
So the sign guidelines have a standard for illumination, a few standards for illumination, and this comes from each of these items. Included here on the left.
Thank you.
And in the past, when this has gone through, building plan checks are routed through the planning department, and you take a look at them then typically. However, it can be shown beforehand and or specifically conditioned here to match these standards here.
I have a question. I'm looking at figure 3 on packet page 36. Could you explain the condition of being placed outside of the city right away?
The specific property line along this area is not currently known by us. There are some assumptions that it is where there's not a great photo. There's a planter that goes along the edge here, and there's an assumption that the property line may be around where that planter is, which would allow them to scoot it in a little bit to up here. But we would need that survey to know for sure where the property line is.
Yeah, I guess I had a similar question. It seems like that would, I mean, both the applicant and the city would want that before coming to us so that we wouldn't be returning, once that was discovered to be incorrect, for instance, or out of that zone. So I guess here's hoping, kind of fingers crossed that that's not the case, but I guess so we just don't know, and we're not typically doing surveys for things like that are going to be important for review.
Sure. So in the past, for hotel properties, there's one that's diagonally across the way, the Red Lion, I think, up on the corner. And they have 3 signs that are located outside of the property in the right of way, the city's right of way. And that was known at the time. It was very obvious that it was outside of those property lines and routed through Public Works and went through the public process. And there were no comments regarding concern about it being in the right of way and that they would be going for an encroachment permit. In this case, we did receive that comment, and it was after the packet had already been put out. And so since we received that, I think it was Monday no, that was a holiday, Tuesday. So when it came in, we've included it as part of this presentation as a recommendation from us.
No, the property line is very close, so it's not like it's 5 feet away, it's like within 1 or 2 feet. So it will likely be that they can put that sign there, but they'll have to move it probably a foot into their property.
But will they? I guess
That's what the condition.
that's the condition. And so just because, I mean, part of what you were saying was, well, it's an existing sign, so we're going to make it easy and all that. So, but moving it, then you're moving it, then would we reconsider putting it on the building structure or something like that? I mean, I'm all for making it easy if we can. I mean, that's great, but those are just my questions. Like, what are the, each of these has another step that then kind of complicates it. So just trying to.
Yeah.
It sounds fairly reasonable. Just trying to ask those questions.
Is it possible to have a condition where they just slide it over a few inches to be safe?
But we need to, we'll get to you in just a minute, but yeah, this, so I suppose we could, right? But the question is why make it more difficult if we don't have to? So it's just, the question is, it's just harder for us to make these judgments without knowing that. I understand why it happened. I think generally it seems like all of our plans should have property lines and things like that on it before it comes to us. Just kind of all stop, but that's just, I think, what we're grappling with a little bit of that.
I'm curious, what is in the photo, looking at it from the street, there's that rectangular cement thing, maybe an access point for utilities. Is that a public access point for something, or is that something for the property itself? Might that be indicative of where the line is?
I would say that would not be indicative of where the line is. We would hope that is in the city's right of way and looking at it from the side, I don't have a side angle that roughly matches with the edge of the planter that I was talking about. It's one of those things where right now it is being assumed that the property line is around there.
Yeah.
And the only way to know for absolute sure is to have a spot survey done at that location.
Okay, but worst case, if anything, I mean, it's getting bumped in a little bit is pretty much all which is, we would think is better, I think, at the city, everybody. Generally, if it's moved closer to the building, that's an improvement. And that's worst case, that's what's happening. Is that what we're saying?
Correct.
that
It
condition.
may not move at all if the property line is
At all,
indeed,
if it's, yeah,
yeah,
but if
Um,
it's,
but it would be moved
So the condition
inches,
could
feet.
be approved with the caveat that should it require a movement of a few inches to be inside the property line, it will still be approved, or I don't know how we would structure that verbally or in writing, but
That might need some wordsmith.
We're still at the question
Yeah, we're
stage, so.
I also have a question about the cement footing. Is the way it's shown in the image with the rendering, is that its existing location? So if they are having to move the sign inward, they're having to demolish the existing cement footing and moving it.
That may be a question for the applicant.
Okay. You just said it's replacing a current sign, so that's why I was thinking the cement footing is existing. So it's just a much bigger deal to completely demolish that and move it if it's just a few inches. That's why I'm asking.
I do not know if they are proposing to remove the concrete anyways.
do you mind just showing that photo again? Just for. Thank you. I mean, that doesn't look like existing, but we'll get there when we get to the applicant. Got it. Yeah, so it's not an existing concrete thing.
And the planter I was
You may
referring
not see
to is
below ground, but yeah.
this line here is currently somewhat assumed to be the property line. However,
Great, thank you.
Could you zoom out a little bit back more? I'm trying to understand what the city's concern is in terms of it being in the right of way.
So we got a comment from a public works engineer that he said that it was a project, I don't know if it was CAP or NCAP, to widen the sidewalk on Monterey.
Yeah.
So they didn't want to have to make the applicant remove the sign that they're gonna build. So they want them to build it out of the right of way.
Everybody would want that, I'm sure, like same applicant, I'm sure would, yeah, that's a comment, sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, that all seems to make a lot of sense. I did have another, was this the only design presented to?
yes,
And I think one of the examples you gave was is actually halo illuminated, so it wasn't actually sort of internally illuminated. I think we're calling that, except for the logo, I think was. And so that I know this comes up quite a bit. Generally, the internally illuminated, we're trying to not do that as much unless maybe it's really reduced in light levels. It sounded like you're saying through the building permit process, that's when that's identified and really reviewed. As someone actually coming out there with a lumen reader?
usually it includes specifications for the sign. There's the photometric scales that you get, and as long as it's within those parameters, we usually clear it. I have not been out there myself with a lumen.
No, yeah, I mean,
Right.
that would be building permit process, I think is yeah, so, okay. All right, I think that's,
I'm sorry.
go ahead, yeah.
I'd still like to go back to the right of way. So that there's an NCIP project to widen the sidewalk. Is it current, and would the current design proposal not allow that? I know I've walked that sidewalk, and I don't remember if that's a thin area or a wide area. Is that the issue? So that that NCIP project could proceed.
So the NCIP or CIP, I don't know which one it is. It would widen the sidewalk to the property line. Right now, it's less, I don't know, like 2 to 3 feet wide. And they're trying to achieve a 5-foot sidewalk, which would allow them to, by moving it, widening it to the property line, it would allow them to achieve that 5-foot sidewalk. So they would have to remove the landscaping that Matthew was pointing out, that landscape strip, in order to widen the sidewalk.
And the city could require that.
Yes.
That leads me to another question, actually, if you wouldn't mind going back to that photo again. Because right now what we're seeing in this photo, there's a buffer. And so I think we'd want to continue to see some sort of buffer between even that new sidewalk and the signage, even if it's as shown, sort of some lawn or something like that. But so I guess that leads us to want to know what that condition is, where that 5-foot line is. It sounds like it's about where you think that planter is potentially. But I guess that our hope is that would be an additional part of, well, that's again, not asking a question. So we'll get to that. But I think that's just where knowing where that line is would again be helpful in review, but I understand again how that happened. Okay, I think I've exhausted my questions. Anybody else? Would the applicant like to make a presentation?
Good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Vanderkratz, owner of Signs by Van. I'm representing Mr. Patel for the Aura Inn, 1300 Munris. There was a couple questions that I think that I could answer regarding lumens, the type of illumination the sign has, whether there's an existing concrete base, and kind of the distance between where the sign's at now and its ability to be able to move closer to the property. And I think I have most of the answers for those. So the concrete base is not existing. So that was a sign that we installed probably over 10 years ago. So that's going to be a full demolition of what's existing. The new concrete base, I see no reason why the owner of the hotel would have any reason with moving that in a couple feet. So if the sidewalk's 36 inches and you want to see 60 inches, I see no issues with that whatsoever. I can pull a Monterey County GIS overlay map and see where that property line exists, and I can internally do that, and I can report back. The client doesn't have to have the sign installed for any sooner than about 30 days. So what I can do is I'll pull those numbers tomorrow, and I can maybe email the staff and kind of let them know what our findings are, so that way we can do some of the legwork on that. So the location, that's not an issue. And then as far as the type of illumination on the sign, we were asking for internally illuminated push-through acrylic letters. And this is a very fancy way. There's multiple different types of internally illuminated signs. There's internally illuminated signs with LEDs that actually just have a digital print that's translucent, which is what you see a lot in like strip malls and whatnot. So it'll just be a printed face and the whole thing lights up. And that really is kind of a very inexpensive, cheap look that you get like in strip malls. So we want to get away from that. Another very common backlit letter is like a halo lit. And that's when you have a 2 to 3 inch thick letter that's hollow on the inside. It's usually aluminum, and it has the LEDs facing towards back towards the sign background. And so that's what gives it that outer halo lit look. And then probably the highest end, most expensive way of approaching internally illuminated letters is a push through acrylic. And that's where you have a 1 inch thick acrylic, solid acrylic letter that goes through that looks beautiful during the day. And then you can set the intensity of the LEDs from inside the box. And you can literally turn that up to where it looks perfect. So an overly lit sign will almost be blurred out when you're driving at night. An underlit sign, you wouldn't be able to see the letters very well, but a perfectly illuminated letter just looks like it's floating on that sign blank, especially when you have a white letter and a black background. So we literally set the intensity at night, and we'll install during the day. We'll go back during the evening. We have a lumen reader that makes sure that we're within compliance with the city, but we also make sure that the focus of the brightness is just right. And there's really just a perfect setting for the brightness of the lettering. So we take all that stuff very seriously. All of the building parameters of the signs meet all California building code, and I could go on: fire code, electrical code, mechanical codes. All of those are within compliance of those. Did I miss any of the other questions, or is there anything else? No, that it. Okay.
I think that was it. Any comments or questions? Sorry, questions for.
Yeah.
Yeah, real quick, you mentioned they can dial up or down the
Mhm.
brightness. Is that something that the staff at the hotel will be able to control on a day-to-day basis, or is it set when you install it?
They would have to go into the back of the sign and manually with keys unlock it. If you want me to hold on to the key, I can, but usually for any, we've all seen like neon signs that when you're driving by them at night, it like glares and it's too much. You'll see them on highway signs. Nobody wants to see that. So when we set the parameter of the lighting and then we check the lumen reading and we say, this is where it needs to be. I've never had a client in all my days go in there and then reset it up to blaring, because you'll be able to see it right off, and people are going to complain. And the biggest complaint is making sure that people at night driving, that's not a hazard, and that's your biggest concern. You want it to be readable, but you want it just enough to where it's not glaring, because then it also emits too much light on the background of the sign and actually makes the letters not look like they're actually floating, because that's why you do those internally illuminated not halo, but internally illuminated letters. So I'll lock it up. They'll have the key, but I don't think they'll make an adjustment.
Thank you.
I was going to have a similar question. I mean, it's come up before, just because many times that's a condition, is that it stays at a certain lumens, but I know that you can dial LEDs quite a bit. Are you confident that it's around 10? Is that just kind of a standard?
The
Or might
lumens?
it be lower when you go out there and adjust it?
So if I read the parameters correctly, it's 10 lumens per linear height or per linear foot, correct? If I'm not mistaken. So these letters are how tall? I believe they're a little taller than that. So these letters are 25.5 inches. So technically for every linear foot, they would have 10 lumens. So they would be allowed 20 total lumens for that big of a letter. The larger place that it has to light up, the more lumens it needs to be able to successfully light up the letter. I can almost assure you that with modern LED technology, we're probably going to be under that luminary reading. It's pretty standard nationally. There's a certain brightness of a letter before it becomes too much and kind of absurd. So we're going to set it to where it exactly needs to be professionally with our opinion. And then we're going to go out there and we're going to read it. And we could certainly give you a reading because we have those lumen readers. We have a couple of them actually. So we could certainly go do that easily. Happy to share that info.
All right, thank you. I suppose, are there any comments from the public or online? Or questions rather, sorry.
There are no attendees online.
Looks like there's a hand raised here in the audience. Would you like to come up and?
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have, what's it? Is it a 3 minutes? Thank you.
Great. My name is Charles Thompson. I live at 50 Via Buena Vista, just around the corner from the hotel. My first comment is that the sign is a very beautiful design as far as the lettering and the dark background. I think it's actually much more attractive than the sign that's there now. So that's fantastic. My only thought, though, is that the internal illumination of the sign makes it look much more commercial. The hotels along Monterey have kept a very cottagey look to that street. You'll see the flowers on the windowsill and those kinds of things. So it's got a great cottagey look. And their signs, I thought all of them were externally illuminated, which also kind of goes to that same cottagey sort of look. And I'm concerned that by beginning to have internally lit signs, it's just going to look just more commercial. and will lead us down a path that'll take us to a place where the street is no longer as attractive as it was. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions? Thank you.
Okay. Still no hands raised online?
Still no attendees online.
Thank you. Then we'll close public comments and open to committee comments.
Yeah, I certainly understand the concern. However, we do see a lot of sign designs, and I think it is very attractive. And I feel really comfortable with the safety element. Seems like the manufacturer installer is really skilled at understanding that. I'm glad location isn't an issue, and I'm leaning toward approval of the project.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yeah, I'm also understanding. I think that is sort of the reason, I believe, for this general consideration to not have internally illuminated signs for many parts of Monterey, is for that kind of general look and feel, which is a big part of, I think, what our committee is here to try and protect and preserve some of that notion and feel. It is tricky because, I mean, some changes do happen. We are wanting to understand that context, and so I appreciate you bringing that to the committee and trying to help us understand kind of that context and what that is. I suppose so, it's tricky for a designer too. I mean, if you're doing something that's considered really kind of top of the line, avant-garde, it will be more visible and noticeable. That's partially our issue. Then it becomes kind of this arms race of more visible and noticeable, et cetera, is what I think is the reason for us to have to review these signs. And so it is a little bit of a tricky situation if nobody else is doing that in that area. However, I do agree, as you stated, that it is a much better sign than is there. It does seem still, while not cottagey, it is, I think, still an elegant design. And so I'm still waffling just a little bit personally with kind of that idea of this kind of cottage look. And I mean, we've had other signs come through that sometimes we regret, and sometimes we wish we had said, no, actually you can't have that. I feel less along the lines of that with this sign personally. But I think it's worth the committee discussing a little bit that topic of kind of where do we draw that line, because sometimes I feel like we do move through approvals sort of quickly just because we do like to see this investment in the community and the change and all that. But it does seem like something worth addressing and commenting on further.
Matthew, can you bring up the other signs that were approved last year? Please.
Yes.
And I mostly bring that up because 1200 Monterey Avenue is right next door. And so that's very similar signage that was just approved.
Halo lit, which is different.
More halo
than-
lit, yes.
Yeah, as opposed to I mean, just looking at it, see the dark
Looks like
on
it,
the
but
inside. I think so. That's
I don't think that's an actual photo of it.
It was halo lit.
Halo
This
lit.
is not.
It was
act-
halo lit, okay.
This is not an actual photo. This is
the
rendering.
application. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think halo lit is generally considered okay. It's not as much of a issue, right? Or I get confused just because with every single zone, there seems to be a different ordinance for the signage. And so can you just remind us of what is in this particular zone, and if we're approving something that is considered an outlier to that general recommendation for the zone?
So part of the sign guidelines is that If it is going to be illuminated, it either needs to be shielded or externally lit. And halo lit has been considered shielded,
Shielded. Mhm.
which is why there are so many
Halo lit.
lit signs in Monterey. The McDonald's sign, for instance, with the black letters there. The primary part that was actually going through ARC was this internally illuminated logo part
Yep.
that was more of concern for the area. I'm sorry, did that answer your question? I got lost there.
It did.
Okay.
So in here, the halo lit would be considered more standard and would not be required to come through, or maybe all signs do anyway, but it's not an outlier in those general recommendations and rules for the zone.
Right. The two main reasons that it's for you guys is VAF, the hotel aspect, and that it's not considered shielded.
I mean, it did cross my mind, for instance, as why didn't we not receive an option? You know, I mean, I guess because then we'd have picked it probably straight off the bat, but
And they are allowed to ask for it through ARC approval as well. So
yeah,
bringing it to you guys is
because I think the halo lit signs are actually quite lovely, and they are a little less brilliant. So I sometimes I do just, you know, wonder why there aren't just more of that. So I'm continuing the conversation along those lines, but
Is that something we can ask the applicant if that was a consideration, or if it could be one?
we could, I think we have to open back up to general comments, which is easy enough to do, but we can.
Yeah. No, I like this is going more philosophical direction here. Looking at the sign, looking at the rendering, that black is clearly a different color than even the wood paneling, the beams. I'm thinking, you know, the sign itself doesn't offend my sensibilities in a way that as it currently is, I wouldn't weigh all of the things against it enough to say no, I don't think. But just in the larger sense of the purpose of the ARC, if things were to come to this committee and present as different, present as more modern, but offer a level of utility or say affordability in the context of a residential development, I would be weighing all those factors here, knowing that the only constant is change. When it comes to the kinds of homes that will get built here, when it comes to the kinds of signs or hotels, life's going to change here. I'm aging into being part of the larger center of the bell curve of population, and we don't have the same aesthetic expectations, I think. That being said, I do think the black clashes a little. And it might be nice to see a little bit more cohesion in the palette. Is that enough to change how we vote today? I don't know. What do you guys think?
I'm more to me when an applicant pushes beyond the standard recommendations of a zone, I have to ask a big question. Why are they doing that? Why wouldn't you just come forward with something that is more accepted and standard and easier to get through without all this conversation, without maybe others wondering why their neighbors and things like that, why that's being done as well. So because I don't think there wouldn't be this much discussion if it's really following kind of general the standards that would not offend maybe neighbors or look more coherent with what's there already.
Yeah, I think a prime example is the gas station signs, right?
Yes, agreed.
Like,
That's coming to mind, but
with the neon, we it was neon, but we disapproved of those.
it was internally illuminated,
Internally.
which which I think we learned later that it was presented as, you know, it was not a change, but we found later that that's actually, we shouldn't have approved it, for instance. And so these are the things that, you know, I do think we just want to be a little bit careful as we're setting a precedent, which I think we discuss quite often. So then if we do that here, we're going to get presented with, here's the 5 that were accepted. So I don't know. I'm waffling on that. I mean, not too much. I'm actually leaning a little bit more towards, why isn't it just a halo illuminated sign that would still be lovely and contemporary? And whereas I like to be a yes person, it's also I don't know, it feels like precedent setting, and it is something that's important. These signs are coming to the public. It's what everybody sees. I'm just imagining you start to see that many more signs that are all lit than you're seeing down the street. At first I was like, well, we've got street signs and lights, all that. It's probably not going to stand out that much, but then it probably does start to. If we had 5 of them, the next one wants it as well. And so I do wonder about that, having that. And why wouldn't a halo lit sign be as easy to have allowed? But so I would we like to yes, we can. So at this point I'd like to open it up to public comment again. Is that acceptable and correct? And let the applicant come up and speak. We will open it up again to the online and things after the applicant has some responses to our questions. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so first off, I appreciate your comments about the more classical type of sign that you've seen on Moonris Avenue. I've got 3 generations of sign makers here behind me. For those of you who don't know my dad, Phil Vanderkratz, he's been building signs here since 1981. And no less than 75% of the signs on Moonris Avenue, the ones that he's referring to, the sandblasted, the Western Red Cedar, the Sequoia, the Dimensional, the Pelicans, the look and feel of Monterey, were designed by that guy right there. So we are 100% in line with, his want and, him wanting to see that classic style. I don't want to say unfortunately, but as time goes on, more and more folks want internally illuminated signs. And we've seen kind of a change in what people would like to see. So keeping within my dad's very strict line of wanting to make sure things that are they're aesthetically pleasing and that they're not overdone, they're done with taste. We've taken internally illuminated signage, and like I said, probably your least expensive is the backlit vinyl. Second of all would be your halo lit 3-inch can aluminum letters that are very commercial looking. That is the epitome of backlit commercial looking signage, is a halo lit letter. Then if you take a push through acrylic letter that is done very tastefully and is not overlit. One thing that stood out to me is you guys were referring to a covered, what was the exact term? Like a covered letter or sheltered?
Shielded, I think.
Shielded letter. So the reason why halo lit is considered a shielded letter is because light doesn't protrude from the face of the letter. So it'll hit from the inside of the can back against the background and thus makes the outline of the letter. When you light an internally illuminated acrylic letter properly, which is to not overlight it, it will actually look a lot classier than a halo lit letter, and it'll win that competition all day long. I'd be happy to follow up with an example of what both look like at night. A can letter is commercial. It's the easiest way of creating a backlit letter. It's what everybody does because it's easy. A push through acrylic is more expensive and it takes a lot more ability to be able to design something that's going to look classy. And that's the way that you do that. So when the client came to us, it was actually suggested potentially different ways of doing a backlit letter. And we said, this is going to be the best way that you can do it. And he goes, I want something that's going to look classy. That's going to be something that's not just here we are. We want to make sure that when we put stuff out there in the wild, that it represents our brand and what we're good at. And that's doing things in our mind better than the most. So that's why we suggested that letter. We could certainly go right into a backlit or a halo lit can letter, but it's just what everybody does. And we can show with this approval just how classy internally illuminated letters can look. And a lot of people don't go for that just because of the cost associated with it. And this person's making a sizable purchase to make this sign right. So,
Great, thank you for that. Any other comments or questions from the committee? If you would stay up actually just for a minute, I do have, if you know, so I appreciate your saying that. I would say in some ways it's to the point that it is what is being done there, that it's not standing out. I appreciate that it's classy, and I think that's correct. It does stand out, that's correct. But I think that's the concern of the neighbor in that sense, is that it stands out and it's classy rather than cottagey. And so everything you said is spot on and true in my mind, but it also is kind of the point that I think we're discussing, that it's something that, you know, isn't stepping above the general feel of the area. And so isn't standing out as much, because then that's the arms race that we're talking about, everybody trying to stand out more. Now, if we're all for making this area more in that classy, standing out a bit more line, then I'd say, yeah, we approve this and say, let's do that. Let's start to make that change happen. But I do think it is with awareness that we should be making that decision, that it is a little bit of a change from that area, which is intentional, I think, by the client to stand out, which I appreciate. As a designer, we like to do that. We like to help the client stand out. But that is the question at issue, I think. Any other questions?
We need to
Thoughts?
continue public comment.
Except are we not having a, I mean, I was going to do that after, if
Oh.
if they still had questions, if the committee still had questions to.
Oh, okay.
The
So
applicant,
you're
because
asking.
we're still
okay,
continuing.
Still asking questions. Okay.
Yes, still asking questions. Any other? No? Okay, any other? Thank you. Any other
thank you guys.
public
There are no attendees online.
and nothing? Okay. Okay. All right, I think we're, you know, it's, we've kind of ended up making this.
I'd just like to make a comment. Several months ago, we did an approval on the Monterey Beach Hotel that came
Correct.
here, and that
That was
type of
internal.
sign was internally
Internally as well.
illuminated, push-through letter thing.
Agreed.
I've gone through that. I think that sign is very tasteful and very elegant, and it serves the purpose for identifying the location for that hotel. And just in my opinion, in this particular case, I think it is a tasteful sign. And given the capability of making or dealing with the city right of way and the sign sizes there, I think this is a legitimate sign in this location.
Thank you.
That's my opinion.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll give my comment. I don't know that moonless strips of motels have truly been defined. I think of that strip of motels and the strip of motels on North Fremont. I feel like they can all use some revitalization. So I really like the design of this particular sign. And and maybe it will even spur some more investment in some of these motels that I feel like could use some attention.
Great. Thank you.
I largely agree with the previous comments, and I think it's also important, you know, it's occurring to me that when we're talking about character Monterey and how this would speak to that or change it, we're not the historic review committee. The character, the cottagey nature, the history of this place is not in its motels specifically. Maybe John Steinbeck would have something to say about that, but I think this Moonross does not, for me, present as iconic. So I'm happy to let it evolve a little bit.
Thank you. Any other comments? Thank you. Great. I really appreciate the robust conversation. I hope that helps both the applicants and neighbors to feel heard in this process. And we should probably get on to the motion.
I move to approve 1300 Venus Avenue sign permit application.
Second.
Can you touch on the condition that staff is recommending?
Specifically, ensuring that the sign is outside the city right of way.
Sure, with the condition that the however, could I get some clarity because the applicant said that that they can do that without, I think I read the condition as requiring a survey, whereas the applicant said that they would, you could do it themselves.
Well, yeah, let's go ahead and back up on that. So I think you're saying he could find the GIS, he can have a discussion with staff to verify where that is. I think the condition for us would be if we want whatever that is, 12 inches from the property line inland into the property, to have some kind of landscape buffer between the sign and the property. That's probably the main, because it sounds like they're no problem. We can move it in. We just need to help clarify the specificity of that condition, which I think we're saying, I think we're all in agreement on that as well. So something along the lines of a generous buffer would be great. Correct? Yeah.
Sure, I don't know how to articulate that.
What, and I do we
Do we have to require a survey?
something, yes, we have to require a survey, which, or, I mean, I think GIS is, it's iffy in survey wise, so I think survey is a requirement, and that's staff, so we agree with staff's
Okay.
recommendations. But then in addition, I think we're saying we want it to not be right on the line, like we wouldn't want to see that sign right with the sidewalk. We'd want it to have some buffer, whatever we say, 12 to 18 inches is something like that.
Can I take back my motion and you do it?
Let's see, motion to approve 1300 Moonrise Avenue sign permit application 240140 for vehicle oriented freestanding sign with internal illumination with the requirement of staff conditions, which includes a survey. In addition, I think we'd want to make sure the illumination is below the certain condition or standard, which is, according to this, said 10 lumens per whatever signage. I think you guys can wrap that up. And 12 to 18 inch buffer from that property line.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
And that is appealable to the planning commission within 10 days with forms available online and in the planning office.
Thank you. This concludes our agenda.
What do you have any?
Well, Can
Sorry.
should we bring Justin back?
Yes, let's bring
If he's
Justin
still
back and
here.
the planning updates
If you're still here.
if he's still there. Thank you.
Thank you.
We gotta learn.
Yeah. I should have just gone back to the office.
The longest discussion. Yeah.
Beat that one to death, huh?
That is where equestrian has expired.
Okay, you can take over, man.
During the meeting.
There you go. I think there's, yeah, and then any comments from staff, any new updates?
Yeah, any announcements or updates?
Nothing other than what's on the agenda packet, but next time, which is the September 18th ARC meeting, there's another Monroe Avenue sign proposed.
How far is it, like, close what's the address?
1240 Monterey,
1240.
So it's like next door, just down the street.
very close.
Same,
Between the two.
same
Oh,
owner.
Yeah,
probably.
1300
I
and
mean, this
1240.
was the same owners. Some previous ones too. Alrighty.
Exciting stuff.
Yeah,
So. Good move directions there, so. All right, so there's no staff reports, so we'll adjourn the meeting.